Hey y'all, it's Nikki. I have to tell you about Tecovas boots. I finally have a pair and they're handmade, high quality, stylish, and comfortable. I even got them customized with leather stamping. The folks at Tecovas will help you find just the right pair. So swing by for yours at the Tecovas flagship on South Congress or their store at the Domain. Plus, good news, they just opened a new store in Georgetown at 709 Main Street for those of y'all that live a little further north. So come shop with me at Tecovas. That's TECOVAS.com. Don't go gently, y'all. Y'all know that statue of the woman lighting the cannon on South Congress, or that troll in Peace Park, or maybe the bronze Barbara Jordan statue at the airport? All of these pieces are part of the Art in Public Places program, which funds cultural landmarks that have become the cornerstones of Austin's identity. But recently, that program has come under fire. Today on CityCast Austin, we get into why. It's Wednesday, April 23rd. I'm Nikki Devon, and this is what Austin's talking about. Hello, I am here today with Heidi Schmalbach, part of the Austin Arts Commission. So the Art in Public Places program turned 40 this year. How are we comparing to other cities?
You're right. The Percent for Art Ordinance, which is the backbone policy and the primary funding mechanism for art in public places, was passed in 1985 and was actually the first in the state of Texas, not the first in the U.S., but the first in the state of Texas. And it started as a 1% for Art program, which is pretty typical, I think, across the U.S. The Percent for Art programs are typically between 1% and 2% of eligible capital expenditures. And we actually are lucky that we have a 2% program now. And comparatively, it's pretty standard. Like a lot of public art programs, Percent for Art programs came online around the same time. So like the decade of the 80s, there was a whole bunch of programs that came online. And an art historian could tell you more and give you a deeper dive on like why that seemed to all happen around the same time. But I think if we look, at the founding of the AIPP program and Austin's ordinance, it's really about a goal of making visual art especially more accessible. So bringing art outside of the walls of galleries, museums, and into the public realm, into spaces where people are going to have experiences with art on a daily basis.
So recently, Austin City Council adopted a resolution to modernize the Art in Public Places policies. So what exactly needed to be updated? What's under consideration?
A Percent for Art ordinance operates typically as a percentage, in our case 2%, of eligible capital expenditures. So these are construction costs when there's a new public building or a renovation of an existing facility or road work or parks. So let's just take the example of we're building a new firehouse, and the fire station costs $10 million to build. 2% of the construction costs are going to be available for commissioning or purchase of art for that site. And this is super standard.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Most programs operate this way. But in practice, that can be pretty restrictive for a few reasons. Like, in my opinion, my experience is tying the project to a site sometimes makes total sense. Like a new library branch. Okay, we're going to have public art in the library that lots of residents are experiencing on a regular basis. That seems like a really wonderful use of the public art percent tied to a site. In my opinion, there are other cases like roadway projects where we end up with, if it's strictly tied to the site or like pretty adjacent to the site, that is the quote unquote sponsoring project, we might end up with more of a car focused, sculpture in a roundabout. That's maybe not the best use of, in some cases, a significant dollar amount that could be instead prioritized to be placed in a different public space where people are gathering, where people are going to have a more transformative experience in relationship to the art than one might if they're in their car. And that's just an example. I think that's what we see with big old projects like the convention center expansion or the airport is like these are really massive projects. Like the convention center expansion or rebuild is $1.6 billion. Okay, so you take 2% of that. Right. I'm not doing the math right now, but that's like, I don't know, 30-ish million.
Yeah, a lot of money.
It makes sense to have art in the convention center. Does it make sense to have $30 million worth of art in the convention center? I don't know.
I don't even know what $30 million worth of art would look like.
Right.
Like, I can't even.
Well, we're about to see.
We're about to see. That's a huge number. Center. Oh, my gosh.
And another part of that is permanence. When you're looking at Austin's percent ordinance, there's another requirement for permanence in the art. And so that is usually defined as like, I think the lowest I've ever seen is 10 years. It's usually more like 20 years.
Right.
Obviously, that limits the kinds of artistic practices that are able to be invested in. The recent recommendation or resolution that was passed at council about updating the AAPP program will give us the opportunity to look at that and see how we might allow for flexibility in ways that make our public art investments more impactful.
Well, so what's the next step for that new policy? When is it going to come back to City Council?
The next step is for staff and most likely a working group of at least the Arts Commission kind of taking a look at where the possibilities are. Like, what do we want out of a public art program? Right. And I feel like if we start there rather than kind of vice versa, which is often like, well, we can't do that because the ordinance says blah, blah, blah. Instead, if we take the approach of saying like, what does a contemporary public art program for Austin look like in the year 2025? And then, articulate that and then start to figure out what mechanisms need to be in place to enable that vision. I think that's what the next step is.
So, okay, let's talk about the convention center. So there was public art at the convention center, which is in the process of being demolished. And, they're going to build a new shiny one and it'll be a few years until it opens. But during the lead up to the demolition, we heard that there were 4 pieces of art that were initially going to be demolished along with the building. So everything was going to just
come on down.
Come on down. Then there was an uproar. I think rightfully so. Rightfully 100%. So. What ended up happening at the convention center with that art, with those art pieces?
So we learned about this in December when there was a working group formed to really do a deep dive into what are the options here. I think everyone agreed and was pretty horrified that there would even be a possibility that those works would be destroyed. Like, that just seemed like unacceptable across the board. Like, there's no reason why, and John Yancey, one of the artists, wrote a really beautiful email. And I think in there he said something like, this would equate to cultural barbarism. And I think he's completely right.
Oh, like, shit.
Truly, like, you don't just destroy art for the expediency of quote unquote development. That's just, it sets a really horrific precedent. Anyway, this working group, and I was on the working group, they had a 4-hour meeting and went over all of the inputs, all of the possibilities, and basically came to the conclusion, as we ultimately did on the commission, under duress, that the next step needed to be deaccessioning so that we could at least seek opportunities to get that work out of the building so that it wasn't in the building when the building came down. When we approved the recommendation to deaccession those pieces, we also wrote a recommendation to the city council that said, basically, like, okay, we're agreeing to this because we basically feel like we don't have any other options. And the city needs to figure out how to preserve these pieces, get them out of the building, preserve them, and either put them in storage or return them to the artist or find a new place to site them. They didn't do that initially. And somebody needs to come up with the money to do that. So this kind of goes back to the AIPP or the Percent for Art challenge, is that money is not for maintenance. So to have a maintenance budget, like an escrow for maintenance, the city needs to find an alternative source for that, the general fund or some other way to have an escrow so that we have funds available for general maintenance and also for situations where things need to be removed, repaired, preserved, whatever. So we suggested city council should compel the convention center to pay for the preservation and removal and either reinstall or giving it to another public space for installation from their $1.6 billion budget, which seems, in my opinion, completely reasonable. That didn't happen. And then somebody's let the press know that this was happening.
Some smart person reached out to the press.
Reached out. And then, as well as the artists in question were very rightfully making noise about it and letting people know, like, this isn't what I signed up for. My work might be destroyed, and it's either on me, this is so unacceptable, on me, the artist, to pay for the removal of my own work and then it becomes my possession again. And this is a legal thing. Like there are real legal issues here with city property, and there's good reasons why we have rules about all of that. It's how we avoid corruption and all these things. But this is a real life scenario where we have artists and artists' families caught up in a really horrific situation that should really never have happened. So thankfully, between advocates, the artists, and the media getting the word out, and then the new director of the ACME, she, to my understanding, has worked really closely with the staff and with the artists and has come up with solutions to remove, preserve, and reinstall at least 3 of the 4 pieces in question. I think there's one that's we're still trying to figure out what happens next, because this was a case where the artist went in and removed it herself.
Oh, okay.
Because she was like,
"Yeah, it's
screw
mine.
You. You're not going.
Yeah, it's mine.
You're not going to destroy my work," which is completely fair. But that presents some new questions about ownership and what happens next. But it was a whole very upsetting debacle that I think, cautiously optimistic, is solved for the short term.
This is a good example and reason why we are where we are. We need to modernize the current policy so that these things are taken into consideration, because we are a very different place than we were in 1985. Hey, Austin. Now, y'all know the plays at the Zach Theater never disappoint. And there is a new one that people can't stop talking about. And honestly, it couldn't have come at a better time. History Meets Humanity in the Tony-nominated play called What the Constitution Means to Me. And since its premiere in 2019, this Pulitzer Prize finalist has captivated the theatrical world and taken Broadway by storm. This play reimagines the Constitution's impact on future generations of Americans. It is relevant, it's hopeful, and it is so funny. Experience the cultural phenomenon that's redefining American theater. What the Constitution Means to Me is on stage right now through May 11th. So get your tickets at zachtheater.org. That's ZACH theater.org.
What sort of promises have you made to yourself this year? Getting in better shape, eating healthier, saving more money, traveling somewhere new? What about discovering a new culture by learning a new language? With Babbel, you can do that in just a few weeks. I'm David Plotz, the CEO of CityCast, and I've been learning Spanish with Babbel. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons, handcrafted by over 200 language experts, get you to begin speaking your new language in 3 weeks or whatever pace you choose. And because conversing is the key to really understanding each other in new languages, Babbel is designed using practical, real-world conversations. The Spanish I learned on Babbel really helped me on a recent trip to Mexico City, ordering in restaurants, shopping at the textile market, cheering on at the Lucha Libre, and I've been keeping it up since I got home. You're a podcast listener. I know that because you're listening here. I bet you'll love Babbel's new podcasts. On Eavesdrop in Espanol, which I listen to, you get to listen to a real conversation, then have the teacher host explain back to you. Then you listen again and catch everything. And you can even read along in the transcript. It's a really fun and effective way to learn. Let's get more of you talking in a new language. Babbel is gifting CityCast listeners 60% off subscriptions at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Hey y'all, it's Nikki. If your mom is like my mom, the one thing she really wants from you this Mother's Day is to see you. This year, you can help her do that all the time by giving her an Aura digital picture frame, which Wirecutter says is the best digital photo frame. My mom, Daisy, loves to be surrounded by pictures of her kids, her grandkids, and the memories we've made together over the years. But y'all, she has no more room on her walls. So this year, I'm giving her an Aura frame, which can hold a crazy amount of photos, and it'll keep her in the loop. We just had a family vacation in Denver, and so instead of wrangling a photo album out of our phones, my sister and I can just upload them directly to the frame. Plus, my sister is always digitizing old photos, and we can send her those too, so none of them will get lost. Aura has a great deal for Mother's Day. For a limited time, listeners can save on the perfect gift by visiting auraframes.com to get $35 off plus free shipping on their best-selling Carver matte frame. That's Aura, A-U-R-A, frames.com. Promo code is CityCast. Support the show by mentioning us at checkout. Terms and conditions apply. Art in public places has been in the news lately for some activity at the airport. You've already touched on it. In March, City Council was set to vote on 3 contracts for out-of-town artists to produce art for the airport at a total cost of $10.6 million. There was some backlash that followed, and then the contracts were pulled from the council's agenda, so they weren't voted on. And then there was an extension for proposals for airport art, particularly for Austin artists and teams. So
there's a little bit of misunderstanding of the kind of order of events here in a way that I think is it seems similar to the convention center, but I actually think it's pretty different. And we'll start by local artists were always integral to the plan for art at the airport. The contracts that were set to be signed by council, and I'm going to back up and go through the process that got us to those contracts. But my understanding of the pause, quote unquote, process was Mayor Watson pulled them from the consent agenda to be discussed because he was wondering what the process was and why we're seeing the first of 3 projects at the airport with big price tags to them going to non-local artists. I understand having the knee-jerk reaction to a big price tag public art project and being like, why are none of these locally based artists? But that only means you're looking at 3 projects where the phases, the actual extent and context of the opportunities at the airport is more like 25 or 30 projects. And only these phase 1 projects were even open to artists who are not local or regional. And local artists were absolutely eligible and considered and finalists. My understanding is that there were a couple of artists that were like, I don't know that I can do that. I'm not sure that I'm confident once I've seen the full scope. We want our artists to be competing successfully for major public art commissions all over the world. What is happening that a number of our recognizable invited artists don't necessarily feel like they're prepared to take on a scope of that size. So that's also important to understand. But the plan overall, the Site and Opportunity Plan, was created by Constance White, who's the arts and music manager at the airport. She put together this plan for the phases of the expansion at the airport. Phase 1 is the one that we're just talking about. Phase 2, call for artists, which is just for local and regional artists, was already open. It closed on March 31st. So I think somewhere the information got conflated that like it was the phase 1 was pulled and then they were like, we need to include local artists. Let's open it up to local artists. That's not the case. And I think phase 3, I don't know where we are in phase 3, but that one's only for local artists, not even regional.
So it just sounds like that everybody was like, hold on. Let's just make sure we understand what's happening. That's it.
Right.
It just
I
sounds
think
like,
so.
We just want to make sure what's going on. And what's going on is that everybody, local artists were absolutely in the running.
Mm-hmm.
They were absolutely a part of the panel process. But it also came down to just like the sheer scale of it and what was needed.
Mm-hmm. The right artist for one project is not the right artist for another project.
It's just not their jam. It's just not their jam.
Right. And it might be local, it might not be local.
Yeah. Okay. That makes way more sense. Now, and so I want to also just kind of really quickly, these are just, you mentioned this, I want to reiterate it. These are just 2 recent high profile, kind of stories. But in my opinion, the Art in Public Places program has worked in general. Like, am I wrong about that? Have things been going fairly well?
I agree with you. I think there are things that can be tweaked. There are always improvements that can be made. I think a big one in public art generally is that flexibility around site selection, where we're choosing to invest in public art. The question is like, what do we want to feel? What do we want this to do? What do we want to accomplish with this program? And have a vision that we've all contributed to.
Like, I could not agree with you more. Is the overall goal, though, to highlight Austin artists? Or is it like, if it's good art, we can have it in our public spaces? Or is it just like we're trying to, as much as we can, highlight Austin artists?
I do think it's both, but I do believe, and I think it's actually codified in the ordinance, and I don't believe that would change, that a certain percentage of commissions have to go to local artists.
I love that.
Not only is it a goal to highlight local artists, but also to use, and here's where I think we could invest further, is how do we help artists take their studio practice into a public art practice? Because it is a learning curve. I mean, there is a lot to think about if people haven't done public art before. Especially in cases where you're integrating the work into a infrastructural project or a capital project, like there's so much to consider around engineering and timelines and EPA, like environmental impacts. I mean, there's a lot going on. And I think the only way you can really get that experience is by having an opportunity. So we need to begin to scaffold opportunities that help our artists, especially, younger artists, but also folks who just are suddenly maybe mid-career or very established and are like, I'm interested in public art and I want to take my work outside of the studio and I need help navigating that process. I think that's something that we could do more of. I think we've done that with Tempo. I think it could be done even better.
So let's say I'm an artist and I want to get into the Art in Public Places program. How do I do that? Where do I start?
Couple of ways. The AIPP website, any open opportunities are going to be listed there. And I think another maybe less considered way of getting involved is to sign up to be on a panel.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So there's AIP panel, and then there are individual jury panels for every public art project. So to learn about the process, I think a really awesome way to do that is to sign up to be considered for a panel. They're also paid. So that's a nice little paid opportunity to learn about the process, to participate in a process, and just kind of understand a little bit more about how the whole selection and citing happens is by going onto AAPP's website and signing up to be considered as part of the jury pool.
Oh, I like that idea. That's actually really smart. So my last question is what I like to call one of my nosy questions. And that question is, what are a couple little few of your favorite public art pieces in the city?
I feel excited about the work that's happening on the trail. They've been hosting Tempo on the trail, which is Tempo is the kind of temporary public art program that is supported by the city. One that stands out to me just from the temporary work at Tempo is the Really Small Eco Museum by Juliette Whitsett, which is the Really Small Museum has been a project ongoing on the east side for I don't know how many years, but it's exactly what it sounds like. Like imagine a little free library, but for art.
Yeah.
We have some incredible murals all over town. I mean, there's just a lot to be excited about. That's what I'm saying.
I know.
We need more and deeper and bigger budgets and like more investment that is not public dollars, really.
Yeah,
and I think
more planning.
I think that's something that I guess like just a big takeaway is that like we hear a lot, and I know this gets talked about all the time, and I think it applies to our grant making programs, it applies to AAPP, it applies to everything that the city does or doesn't do to support and bolster our local artists, is that like we make a lot of claims about what the arts can do, often around economic development, increased test scores, like whatever the sort of instrumental arguments that are made all the time about art. And I personally like believe in all of that. I know I'm a researcher in the arts. I know that this is true, but I think like to enable all of that, we first and foremost have to invest in artists and invest in the right now what we have is a system that really weights consumption of art more than production. So the more that we can tilt our investments so that we're investing in the production, cultural production, the production of art, and investing in our artists, and that's from the earliest ages in arts education all the way through, you know, the most experienced artists trying to change the way that they practice, that's where we're going to see the greatest impact and all of the things that we know that arts and artists could do for us collectively. So I feel like we've done a lot well. There's a lot to address, but I feel encouraged by the new direction. If anybody listening is curious and excited or angry and skeptical, is like, get involved. Like now is the moment to really get involved. Like we have an opportunity to envision, you know, a city that embraces arts and supports artists in ways that are really meaningful. And I think this is the time to do that.
Heidi, thank you so much for being here and breaking this down for me. This was a really like palatable explanation and understanding about what's going on and how we can show up and how we can help in our city, around the city with the art. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I love geeking out about public art.
That's all for today here on CityCast Austin. Go get out and see some art today if you can. You can find links to the Art in Public Places program in our show notes. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and of course, subscribe to our Hey Austin newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye, y'all.